Have you ever looked at someone who seems incredibly calm in the middle of a total disaster and wondered how they do it? Or maybe you are that person, the one who doesn't flinch when things go wrong, the one everyone leans on because you're so strong, but inside, you feel like a ghost haunting your own body. There's a specific kind of silence that follows a person who has endured too much for too long. It isn't the silence of peace, it's the silence of a house that's been boarded up to survive a storm that never seems to end. When we talk about people who have gone through too much, we aren't just talking about a single bad day or a rough breakup. We are talking about chronic hardship, the kind of emotional overload that rewires the very circuitry of the human brain. This is the psychology of the overburdened, a deep dive into how the mind adapts when life stops being a series of experiences and starts being a series of survival tests. To understand this, we have to look at the architecture of the brain itself. Most of us are familiar with the fight or flight response, that primal surge of adrenaline that helps us outrun a predator. But when trauma becomes chronic, when the predator is a parent, a partner, a systemic injustice, or a relentless string of tragedies, the brain can't stay in a state of high alert forever. It would burn out. It would be like running a car engine at the red line for years on end. Eventually, the engine would melt. So, the brain adapts. It moves from fight or flight into a state of functional freeze or dorsal vagal shutdown. In the brain of someone who has seen too much, the amygdala, which acts as the body's smoke detector, becomes hypersensitive. It starts seeing fire everywhere, even in a flickering candle or a warm sunbeam. Meanwhile, the prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for logic, decision-making, and emotional regulation, starts to go offline more frequently. This creates a state of constant internal friction where the body is reacting to threats that the mind is trying desperately to rationalize. You feel the panic in your chest, but your brain can't find a reason for it, so it begins to search for one, often leading to intense overthinking or a sense of impending doom. This isn't just stress. It's a physiological restructuring. The brain is effectively prioritizing survival over living. It sacrifices the ability to feel joy, spontaneity, and connection in exchange for the ability to anticipate danger and endure pain. This is where the hallmark of the trauma survivor personality begins to emerge, the hyper-independence. You've probably met this person, or maybe you see them in the mirror. They are the ones who refuse to ask for help, even when they are drowning. They will carry the heaviest load, work the longest hours, and solve everyone else's problems while staying silent about their own. To a casual observer, this looks like strength or an admirable work ethic. But psychologically, it's a defense mechanism born of necessity. When you have gone through too much, you have likely learned a very painful lesson, that help is either unreliable, conditional, or comes with a price tag you can't afford. Hyper-independence is a way of saying, if I don't need anyone, no one can let me down, and no one can hurt me. It's a wall built out of the bricks of past disappointments. It's the belief that the only hands you can trust are the ones at the end of your own sleeves. For these individuals, asking for help doesn't feel like a relief, it feels like a danger. It feels like exposing a soft underbelly to a world that has already proven it can be cruel. This independence is often coupled with a deep sense of shame, the idea that needing someone is a sign of failure. So, they stay isolated in their strength, becoming a pillar for everyone else while their own foundation is crumbling. But this independence comes at a cost. It leads to a profound sense of isolation, even when surrounded by people. This is often accompanied by a phenomenon known as emotional numbness or dissociation. When the world becomes too painful to process, the mind pulls the emergency brake. It creates a distance between the person and their emotions as a way to preserve what's left of their sanity. If you can't feel the sorrow, you don't have to break. You might find yourself watching your own life like a movie, feeling disconnected from your body or your surroundings. This is the brain's way of saying, I can't handle this reality right now, so I'm going to check out. The tragedy of numbness is that it isn't selective. You can't mute the pain without also muting the joy. You can't turn down the volume on the sadness without losing the melody of the laughter. This is why people who have endured long-term hardship often seem distant or flat. They aren't being cold, they are operating in a low-power mode because their emotional battery has been depleted for years. They are existing in the gray space because the red of anger and the blue of sadness are simply too loud to bear. They might walk through a beautiful sunset or achieve a major life goal and feel nothing. And that nothingness is often more terrifying than the pain itself, because it makes them feel fundamentally broken or hollow. Then there is the over-self-awareness. This is a peculiar trait where the person is hyper-aware of every micro-expression on someone else's face, every shift in the tone of a room, and every potential mistake they might be making. It's a form of hypervigilance. If you grew up or lived in an environment where you had to walk on eggshells, you became an expert at reading the vibrations of the floorboards. You learned to predict the storm before the first drop of rain fell. You became a social detective, analyzing every word for hidden meanings or signs of impending rejection. In adulthood, this manifests as an inability to relax. Even in a safe environment, the brain is scanning for exits, analyzing social cues, and rehearsing conversations in advance to avoid conflict. This leads to fawning, a trauma response where the individual becomes a chronic people pleaser. They abandon their own needs to ensure everyone else is comfortable, because if everyone else is happy, then, and only then, are they safe. They become chameleons, shifting their personality to match the expectations of whoever they are with. They have no boundaries because boundaries feel like a threat to their safety. They say yes when they mean no until they are so resentful and exhausted they simply disappear. This brings us to complex post-traumatic stress disorder, or CPTSD. Unlike standard PTSD, which often stems from a single, discrete event, CPTSD is the result of prolonged exposure to trauma from which there is no perceived escape. It's the too much for too long syndrome. While standard PTSD might cause flashbacks to a specific moment, CPTSD creates emotional flashbacks. You might suddenly feel a wave of worthlessness, terror, or despair that doesn't seem to match your current situation. You aren't seeing a memory, you are feeling a memory. CPTSD reshapes a person's entire worldview. It affects their attachment style, often leading to a disorganized or avoidant way of relating to others. Trust becomes a foreign concept, a luxury they can't afford. When you've been let down by the people or systems that were supposed to protect you, trust feels like a gamble with impossible odds. You might find yourself testing people, waiting for them to fail you so you can say, "I knew it." Even when things are going well, there is a nagging voice in the back of the mind saying, "This won't last. The other shoe is about to drop." This is the brain's way of trying to prevent a surprise attack, but it ends up poisoning the present moment. It makes it impossible to sink into a relationship or a moment of peace because you are always poised for the impact that your history tells you is coming. What's truly fascinating, and heart-wrenching, is how resilience coexists with this emotional shutdown. We often talk about resilience as bouncing back, but for those who have seen too much, resilience looks more like carrying on. It's the ability to function at a high level while carrying an invisible mountain on your back. It's getting up, going to work, raising children, and being a friend while your internal world is a landscape of craters. This is why these individuals are often the most reliable people you know. They are used to operating under extreme pressure. They have a high tolerance for pain because they've had to. They can navigate a crisis with a cool head because a crisis feels like home. But we must be careful not to romanticize this. This kind of resilience is often just functional collapse. The person is moving, but they aren't truly living, they are surviving. They have become so good at performing okayness that no one notices they are actually starving for genuine connection and rest. Over time, this chronic state of too much leads to emotional burnout. This isn't just being tired from a long week, it's a deep, soul-level exhaustion that sleep cannot fix. It's a tired that lives in the bones. It's the feeling that yourself has been eroded by the tides of hardship until there's very little left of the original person. You might look back at photos of yourself from years ago and not recognize the light in those eyes. You wonder where that person went. The long-term mental health effects of this can be devastating, including chronic depression, generalized anxiety, and complex grief. But it doesn't stop at the mind. The body keeps the score, as the famous book by Dr. Bessel van der Kolk explains. When the mind is forced to suppress too much, the body often absorbs the impact. This can manifest as chronic physical pain, migraines, digestive issues, or autoimmune flares. The nervous system is stuck in a state of high tension, and the muscles, organs, and immune system eventually begin to fail under the weight of that constant stress. Your body is screaming the words your mouth was never allowed to say. One of the most difficult aspects of going through too much is the sense of lost time. There is a profound grief for the version of yourself that could have existed if life had been kinder. You mourn the childhood you didn't have, the young adulthood that was spent in survival mode, and the years lost to depression or toxic relationships. This grief is often unacknowledged by society, which expects survivors to just move on once the situation has improved. But how do you move on from the loss of your own potential? How do you reconcile the fact that you had to spend your best years just trying to stay alive while others were free to grow and play? The path forward for someone who has endured this is not a quick fix. It begins with acknowledging that these maladaptive behaviors, the distance, the hyper-independence, the overthinking, were actually brilliant survival strategies at the time. They weren't wrong, they were necessary. If you hadn't become hyper-independent, you might not have survived. If you hadn't become a people pleaser, you might have been in more danger. The distant person was protecting their heart from being shattered again. The overthinker was trying to prevent a catastrophe. Healing isn't about fixing a broken person, it's about gently showing the nervous system that the war is over. It's about moving from a state of surviving to a state of being. This transition is incredibly difficult because it requires letting go of the very shields that kept you alive. For someone who has gone through too much, letting your guard down feels like an invitation to be destroyed. It feels like walking into a battlefield without armor. This is why healing often feels worse before it feels better. When you finally stop running and start feeling, all the emotions you've suppressed for a decade come rushing back at once. It's like a floodgate opening. It takes a massive amount of courage to be vulnerable when life has taught you that vulnerability is a weakness. It requires a slow, patient process of rebuilding self-worth. When you have been treated as too much or not enough for so long, your internal compass for your own value gets skewed. You start to believe that your worth is tied to how much you can endure or how much you can do for others. Relearning that you have inherent value just by existing is the hardest work a survivor will ever do. It involves silencing the inner critic, that harsh internal voice that echoes the criticisms of past abusers or the coldness of a neglectful world. Healing also requires the widening of the window of tolerance. When you've been through too much, your window of tolerance, the zone where you can handle emotions without shutting down or exploding, becomes very narrow. The smallest stressor can push you into a panic attack or a state of complete numbness. Therapy, mindfulness, and somatic experiencing are all tools used to slowly stretch that window back out. It's about teaching the body that it is safe to feel a little bit of anger, a little bit of sadness, or even a little bit of joy, without the system crashing. If you are listening to this and you recognize yourself, I want you to know that your exhaustion is valid. You aren't weak for feeling numb, and you aren't broken because you find it hard to trust. You are a person whose system has been pushed to its absolute limit, and you have survived. That is a testament to your strength, but you shouldn't have to be that strong forever. The world often praises the strong because they are convenient, they don't complain, they get things done, and they don't ask for much. But the strongest thing you can actually do is admit when you've had enough. It's allowing yourself the grace to be tired. It's realizing that too much is an objective reality, not a personal failure. There is a concept in Japanese art called kintsugi, where broken pottery is repaired with gold. The cracks aren't hidden, they are highlighted. The piece is considered more beautiful and more valuable because it has a history of being broken and repaired. This is the goal of healing from chronic hardship. You won't ever be the unbroken version of yourself again, and that's okay. The version of you that exists now, the one who has integrated the lessons of survival with the peace of the present, is someone deeply profound. You have a level of empathy and insight that those who have lived easy lives can never truly understand. You can see the pain in others because you know the map of that territory by heart. As we wrap up this deep dive, remember that the human mind is incredibly plastic. It can be reshaped by trauma, yes, but it can also be reshaped by healing, by safety, and by time. The journey back from too much is not a straight line. There will be days when the walls go back up and the numbness returns, and that's okay. Your brain is just trying to protect you. The goal isn't to become the person you were before the hardship, that person is gone. The goal is to become someone new, someone who knows the depths of the shadows but is no longer afraid to stand in the light. Someone who understands that while they can do it all alone, they no longer have to. You are allowed to take up space. You are allowed to have needs. You are allowed to stop being the one who carries everything for everyone else. Sometimes, the most heroic thing you can do is simply stop, breathe, and let someone else hold the weight for a while. You've spent a long time being the pilot of a plane with two engines on fire. You've done an incredible job keeping it in the air. But you deserve to land. You deserve to walk on solid ground. You deserve to look at the sky and just see the sky, not a source of potential lightning. If this exploration of the survivor's mind resonated with you, it might be time to look deeper into the resources available for processing complex trauma and CPTSD. Understanding the mechanics of your own mind is the first step toward taking the controls back. There are people who understand this specific kind of pain, and there are ways to rewire your nervous system for peace instead of just survival. Links to recommended self-help books in the description. If you like this content, drop a comment and subscribe. Every story of survival is different, and sharing yours might just be the light someone else needs to find their way out of the dark. Don't forget to check out our other videos on mental health, trauma recovery, and the psychology of resilience. Take care of yourself, because you've already been through enough.